Ellie. Ta-da. Okay, we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 13. Oh, and Ellie, before you sit down, back in the printer in the hopper are a whole bunch of study guides. So if you want to grab those, and I'll need one also. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, there it is. Zach, is Caleb okay? Okay. I think the proper response is what? Am I my brother's keeper?
That's not walking around earlier.
All right.
He's picking up some pie, I think.
Supposed to show a little more concern. Ah, there he is. Just wondered where you were. He'll need a study guide, I think. Got one for yourself? Okay. Caleb has one? Caleb, do you have a study guide? Very good. Okay. Excellent. Well, let's see here. We've got enough time to finish this, I think, or get started. This is not a long chapter. It's pivotal. It's interesting. The scene shifts back up to the northern kingdom. If you remember, we have the southern kingdom. Remember with when, what was the guy's name? I'm going to get it right here. Yeah. Ahaziah, when he was killed by Jehu up north, Ahaziah was king of Judah. You got to keep these kings straight. And then, just in case you think you've just about got it, then they start naming them the same names. Okay, so it's like, so you've got Jehoash of Judah, Jehoash of Israel. Okay, so it's a little confusing. At least it was for me the first time through years ago. But then eventually, oh, okay, yeah, that's a different guy. Okay, so we have Ahaziah. He dies. Then Athaliah, his mother, kills off all the royal seed, but the one lady rescues him. You remember Jehosheba. She was the daughter of King Joram. Okay, that's Athaliah, Ahaziah's dad. She rescues. I'm looking at chapter 11, trying to get all the kings straightened out before we get to 13. Anyway, Athaliah, Joash is crowned king as a little boy. They get rid of Athaliah, who's absolutely wicked, Baal worshiper. And then Jehoash repairs the temple. He's a pretty good king as long as his adopted father, you might say, was spared or alive. Jehoiada, the high priest, as long as he was alive. Jehoash of Judah was a good king, and then after Jehoiada died, Jehoash started listening to the leaders in Israel. They wanted to reintroduce idolatry, and so he let them do it. And anyway, and then he reigns in Israel, and because of his apostasy, he's killed. His own servants were told in chapter 12 at verse 20, and his servants arose and formed a conspiracy and killed Joash, same as Jehoash, same guy, in the house of Milo, which is the middle area in Jerusalem, which goes down to Silla, for and it tells you who it was that killed him. Okay, and then Amaziah, not Ahaziah, Amaziah, his son, came and became king of Judah. Now in chapter 13, things switch, and we're going to look back up in the northern kingdom now, where we've had Jehu reigning. Okay? If you remember when Jehu died, you've got to go back to chapter 12. Okay? We're told that he died, and verse 34 says, "Now the rest of the acts of Jehu, all that he did in his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Jehu rested with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria." That was the capital city up north. Then Jehoahaz his son reigned in his place. Okay, and we're told Jehu had reigned for 28 years. So that's what happened. Now we're back. Then we went down and looked at Judah and all the stuff that happened with Athaliah and Jehoash, and now the scene shifts back to Jehoahaz, and we're told that in verse 1, in the 23rd year of Joash, the son of Ahaziah, this is like kings of Judah now, or king of Judah, that one, Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king over Israel in Samaria. So it coordinates the reigns of the kings up north with the kings up south, and it tells us, okay, Joash had been on the throne for 23 years when this happened, and then Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, became king over Israel. Okay, so we have this coordinating it with the southern tribe or southern tribes.
Question: this happens before the end of chapter 12.
It's really hard. I'm gonna have to make a chart to show who's going on where and what's happening at what place, because there's a little bit of overlapping time. And when it does the overlap, sometimes it'll go back, like we're talking about the kingdom in Judah, it'll take it up to a certain period, and it goes back to talk about Israel, and actually goes back in the middle of that time and takes it down. For instance, like Joash, or Jehoash, king of Judah, in his 23rd year, is when Jehoahaz became king of Israel, in the 23rd year. But Jehoash reigned actually 40 years in Judah, as we're told in chapter 12, verse 1. Okay, so we're about halfway through his reign when this happened. So now we've already gone down to the death of Jehoash, but now it's going to go back 18 years it is, or 17 years before. Takes it back, and that's when Jehoahaz became king in Israel. Okay. So we've gotten 17 years of information about what was happening down south. Now we have to go back, and then they kept track of their calendar dates by the reigns of their kings. It'd be real easy to say, in 732 BC, when he did it. We do that in our study notes and stuff, trying to coordinate and figure it out. So now we're going back a little bit in time. We're going back 17 years before Joash is killed, and I don't think it says how many years he'd reigned when Jehoiada the priest died. I'm talking about the king in Judah. So this might be before Jehoash in Judah really went bad. He did that toward the latter part of his reign. Okay. So anyway, a little bit beyond the middle of his reign, up north, Jehoash the son of Jehu becomes king because Joash died. And I believe Jehu was given promises that his dynasty would last for several generations. Okay, and he reigned 17 years. Kind of interesting, because that means they're both going to have their reign up north and south. Their reigns were going to end about the same time. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So now we're talking about Jehoahaz in Israel, the northern kingdom. Everybody with me on this? Not too confusing? The northern kingdom are the 10 tribes that had rebelled against Solomon's son Rehoboam, remember? Okay, and the southern kingdom is the tribe of Judah primarily, but also Benjamin, okay? Because Benjamin was right with them. And Benjamin stayed with Judah for the most part. Okay, so now we're talking about the northern kingdom. It's been going on now for quite a while. And so he did evil in the sight of the Lord and followed the sins of Jeroboam. That was the first king up north, the son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. If you remember, it says Jehoahaz did not depart from the sins that Jeroboam had initiated. That was primarily he set up golden calves in Bethel and in Dan. Dan's a city way up north. Bethel is a city way down south. So entering his kingdom or exiting it, you had to pay homage to the golden calf. If you were going to go down to Jerusalem to worship, well, technically you could be stoned to death, because the only way you're going to get out of Israel to go down to Jerusalem to worship, they're going to make sure you offer some kind of offering to the golden calf. Either that or you're going to have to sneak around and find out how to get down to Judah. That might not be easy, because the two kingdoms were very often at war with one another, and so you had border patrols going on. So he set it up so that his people wouldn't be going down to Jerusalem because he felt that might make them turn their allegiance back to the kings of the house of David. But whatever the reasons were, his descendants continued to do this. They continued to follow in the sins of Jeroboam. It says, who made Israel sin. So he was the cause of it. Now, Israel was responsible, that is the people. They were responsible for their sins, but their leader is also held responsible. It said he made Israel sin. Now, he didn't force them to sin necessarily, but he set things up so if they wanted to prosper or survive, like we've been looking at in Revelation, you had to get the mark of the beast in order to function in society under his reign. Same things here. You had to go through, with the golden calf stuff in order to survive, basically. You couldn't buck the king. Verse 3, then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and he delivered them into the hand of Hazael, king of Syria, and into the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael. So there's two generations there being looked at. But also there might be a co-reign that happens sometimes. Trying to figure out, how this person reigned for this amount of time. It says here he reigned, it's a different time. Because there was co-regency often. You'd have the crown prince considered to be ruling before his father had died, but he was functioning as the king. So that's trying to figure that out. Thiel is the fellow that wrote a book on the chronology of the kings of Israel and Judah, and he worked through this stuff. Everybody that's looked at his work says they're pretty sure he got it right. But it happened, which was common in the Middle East. That's even common today sometimes, but we don't have a lot of kings and princes running around. So Ben-Hadad and Hazael created a lot of problems for Jehoahaz. And he delivered them into the hand of Hazael, king of Syria, and into the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, all their days. So, but then we read an interesting thing. This guy, we've just been told this guy did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. But then we read, so Jehoahaz pleaded with the Lord, that's Yahweh, Jehovah, and the Lord listened to him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, because the king of Syria oppressed them. So apparently it was a pretty serious oppression going on. But it's interesting, this king that is said did evil in the eyes of the Lord, when Israel was getting overwhelmed, he knew to pray. He cried out to the Lord for help. Then the Lord gave Israel a deliverer, and we're going to see that's probably Jehoahaz's son, who would have been the crown prince. It just says that here. It doesn't give us any specifics as to the name. But by the time you get to the end of the chapter, it's like, it looks like if we go back and do the chronology and figure out when, the deliverer is Jehoahaz's son. Pretty clear. And his son's name was Jehoash, or Joash, same as the king down in Judah that we've read quite a bit about that was saved from Athaliah, but it's a different person, okay? So then the Lord gave Israel a deliverer so that they escaped from under the hand of the Syrians, and the children of Israel dwelt in their tents as before, so they recovered their territory. Nevertheless, they did not depart from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, who had made Israel sin, but walked in them. And the wooden image, by the way, in the Hebrew, it's Asherah, which is a term meaning an idol, a wooden goddess, or that they would set up. It says in the margin of my Bible, a Canaanite goddess, and it had to do with perverse ceremonies, kind of like Aphrodite among that was the Greeks or the Romans. I can't keep track of all those pagan deities. But they walked in the sins of Jeroboam. Now, Jeroboam, one thing we do know about him, he got rid of Baal worship. So when it was talking about the sins of Jeroboam, one of the things that was not a sin of Jeroboam was Baal worship. He got rid of it. He exterminated those guys out of his kingdom. But the other pagan religions, those rites were more pleasing to the flesh and not quite as violent and bloody. He seemed to have tolerated them. Okay. And the worship of Asherah would fall into that category, okay, with immorality practice in their supposed worship, okay. So they walked in the sins of Jeroboam, and the wooden image also remained in Samaria, so they allowed a wooden idol to be set up there, or an Asherah. For he left the army of Jehoahaz, that is Hazael and Ben-Hadad, his son. For he left the army of Jehoahaz only 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers, for the king of Syria had destroyed them and made them like the dust at threshing. So the Syrians had basically demilitarized Israel for the most part. Now when it says 10,000 soldiers, that can also, a 1,000 in Hebrew is a military unit. That's why you have these round numbers. We've talked about this before. So, when it says 10,000, someone can say, well, you say the Bible's inerrant. You mean to tell me it was always exactly 10,000, not 999? 9,999, and not 10,001. It's exactly that number. Well, if the Bible says it, if that's what it meant, yeah, I do believe that's true. But I think we're talking here about military units. The word for thousands is elephim. So he left him 10 elephim, 10 battalions he had. And that was primarily to maintain the peace. And the idea was once he's in submission, he can still have his own police force. That's common in warfare. Even at the end of the American Civil War, a lot of people don't realize this, the Southern Army, their officers were allowed to keep their pistols when they went back home because they realized we need a police force and we're not going to be able to, the Union, the Northern guys, we're not going to be able to occupy the South quick enough, nor will they necessarily respect us. These guys know their own people. They respect these guys. They can go back and they can enforce the laws. So they didn't actually, let them keep their sidearms and their horses, and they let them go back home. That's a very crazy war. But this was kind of maybe similar, the idea you can have enough troops to maintain peace in your country, but not enough to start a war with us. So, or to defend yourself if we decide to come in and take your stuff. That's what they'd been doing. So they ground up all their military abilities. Now we're told the rest of the acts of Jehoiahaz, all that he did, and his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? And like I say, that's not the same as our book of Chronicles in the Bible. As a matter of fact, Jehoiahaz isn't mentioned very much at all in Chronicles, if at all. So Jehoiahaz rested with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria. Then Joash's son reigned in his place. Okay, so now we have Joash come to the throne. And this is Joash in Israel. We're up north, okay? And so his son now, Jehoash, so we're told, okay? In the 37th year of Joash, king of Judah, this is toward the end, Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, became king over Israel in Samaria and reigned 17 years. So Jehoash in Judah, he's got, about 3 more years to reign, and then he's going to be gone. But now there's a king Joash or Jehoash, and we'll see the same thing is done with the northern king's name as is done with the southern. He's Jehoash, but sometimes he's called Joash, okay? Like I said, it's just to make sure you're following along because you really need a scorecard with this stuff, I think. So he's up north, and then it says in verse 11, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. By the way, every king in Israel, if it's said at all, it's said that he did evil in the sight of the Lord because none of them dealt with the idolatry and actually made an effort to get all of it out of the land. Okay? In the southern kingdoms, you'll see their kings, when it says he did that which was right in the Lord, they kind of get a little bit of grace given, not a little, grace is a lot whenever it's given, but they say that when he did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, but, and then it'll usually have a slight caveat where it'll say, but he didn't remove the high places. It doesn't say people were worshiping false gods at the high places. Those were quick to fall into idolatry, but they weren't always idolatrous. They worshiped the Lord, but they didn't want to have to leave their village. Say, hey, look, we've got a high place here. Let's go off. There's an altar up there that somebody put up there centuries ago. Let's go. We can sacrifice a lamb there instead of going to Jerusalem. So they did that, and then the kings, often in the southern kingdom, would let them get away with that. But it was displeasing to God. But in this case, he did evil in the sight of the Lord. Again, note this pattern. He did not depart from all the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel sin, but walked in them. So these northern kings are just not good kings for the most part. But again, you see there's a mixture here. There's some strange stuff, okay? We just saw with Jehoahaz, it says he did that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord, but when he sees his country getting stomped on by the Syrians, he cries out to the Lord, it says, and the Lord heard him. You know, it's like we look at some of our political leaders today, and some of them are horrible people, okay? Way too many of them are horrible people. There's some good ones, though, but there's some pretty bad ones. And if someone, an inspired writer, was necessarily going to write their biographies, he might say he or she did that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord. But nevertheless, et cetera, they passed a few bills and did a few things that were legitimate. Or when things were really bad, they cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord heard them because God's merciful and He keeps covenant. Whatever the reason, my point is that human nature is what it is. And so you've got kind of a mixed bag here on some of this, where these guys are like, they're inconsistent in their wickedness, and they're definitely inconsistent in any godliness. So like I say, Jehoahaz prays, and God hears his prayer. But then it said that he continued on in the sins of Jeroboam. So it's like his prayer. It's like 9/11. When that happened, when the planes flew into the World Trade Centers, people were crying out to the Lord. Nobody knew what to think. Churches were filled. People were shocked and in mourning. Never had anything like that happen in the United States before, ever. That was unique. People were crying out to God. After a couple of years went by, people started figuring out, hey, there's no planes flying into our high-rise buildings, so who's the Lord? What? You're praying in public? How dare you do that? So then they started turning and hardening their hearts. It's like they were real repentant when things were scary, but it didn't last. So we've seen that. What we're seeing in the Bible, we see it in our own culture, that when things are really bad, people begin to cry out to the Lord. Once things improve, they don't have time for God. Okay? So not too far away from when we go back and read the Bible, we find out, well, human nature is still the same. It's only the grace of God that changes hearts. So here we're told, so Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, became king, that's verse 10, over Israel, Samaria, and reigned 16 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, as I just read. He did not depart from all the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, but made Israel sin, who made Israel sin, but walked in them. Now the rest of the acts of Joash, all that he did, and his might, which he fought against Amaziah, king of Judah, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? So Joash rested with his fathers, then Jeroboam sat on his throne. Okay? So now we've got a Jeroboam, not the son of Nebat, we've got the Jeroboam, the son of Joash, or Jehoash, who is not Jehoash of Judah, but the Jehoash of Israel. Okay, everybody got this? It'll be on the final.
How come they use Joash and Jehoash interchangeably?
It's like Nicholas and Nick, you know. I think that's what it is. There doesn't seem to be any real deep reason why, just like he was known by both names. There may be more to it than I'm saying. If there is, I'm not aware of it. Okay. It's there for a reason, though, that we know. Okay. The Bible is telling us the truth about what his name was, and he goes by both forms of his name. But other than that, it's like Chuck and Charles, I think. I kind of get that feeling. It is interesting when each name is used, Jehoash and Joash. It's like, okay, the Joash seems to be in less formal occasions, but not always. So I don't know. Okay, might be something to study out. So we're told now Jeroboam sat on his throne, and Joash was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Okay, so Joash, or Jehoash, of Israel dies. He's buried. His son Jeroboam now comes to the throne. So let's keep that in mind. So we're not going to forget about Joash. He's going to come up at the end of the chapter. So Elisha, remember him, the prophet? Probably been prophesying for over 50 years by this time. Elisha had become sick with the illness of which he would die. Interesting, Elisha had done miracles of healing, but yet he gets old, gets sick, and he's going to die. That doesn't mean God wasn't with him, but it means he was getting old and he was going to die. Then Joash, the son of Israel. So now we're going back here, okay? We ended with Jeroboam coming to the throne after the death of Joash. So now we're going back. We're not told necessarily how far back it was, but Joash is on the throne now in this scene, okay? If we were making a film, we'd have a flashback, okay? It cuts back to when Joash was younger, perhaps, okay? So then Joash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over his face. So again, Josh, we've just been told that He did evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet when he hears Elisha is sick, he comes and cries. He weeps. He's saddened by this. So he held Elisha in great esteem, even though his character isn't given really any high praise here, okay, and he's still involved in the sins of Jeroboam, and yet he apparently had a soft spot in his heart for Elijah, or Elisha rather. So he comes down to him and wept over his face and said, "Oh, my father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen." Now that's an interesting phrase. Now, if you think, if I was to ask you, have we heard that phrase before? Does anybody remember when we heard that last time in Scripture? "Oh, my father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen." Exactly. Yeah, Elisha said that when he lost, in one sense, Elijah. Elijah was taken away from him, not in a bad way. Elijah went up to heaven. Remember, a fiery chariot came and Elijah was carried up. And Elisha, when he saw it, he said, "Oh, my father, the chariots of Israel and the horsemen thereof." And so Joash comes down, who, like I say, this king, we're told he did that which is evil in the eyes of the Lord. And yet, we'd have to say, he's not all bad by God's grace. Okay, left to himself, he's totally bad, just like all the rest of us, okay? He's a totally depraved sinner. But yet you can see the grace of God and his knowledge that Elisha had really been a friend. If you remember when Elijah would meet up with Ahab, and Ahab's response was, "Oh, my enemy." And it's like, Ahab was too stupid to realize that the only friend he really had was Elijah. That was the only guy in the kingdom telling him the truth. Everybody else that tried had gotten killed by Jezebel. But he marks Elijah as his enemy because he was telling him stuff he didn't want to hear. But Elijah was the only guy telling him the truth. You've got to repent or you and your house are going to be destroyed. But he considered, he's my enemy because he's telling me stuff I don't want to hear. Okay, and so it looks like maybe Joash, within a couple of generations, they finally learned the lesson that maybe this is a bad thing. If he's going to leave us, this is the guy that's told us the truth. Seems like he recognizes that, and he is sensitive of the loss that he's going to experience when Elisha is gone. "Oh, my father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen." Now, Elisha is not getting taken up with a fiery chariot, but Joash is getting ready to lose him, and he realizes he's a friend. And we see this friendship between them. Verse 15, "And Elisha said to him, 'Take a bow and some arrows.' So he took himself a bow and some arrows." Probably had some people accompanying him. There might have been bows and arrows laying around, but he had other soldiers with him. This is the king of Israel, and there's wars going on, so he probably had some armed men with him. So he does that. Then he said to the king of Israel, that is, Elisha said to him, "Put your hand on the bow." So he put his hand on it, and Elisha put his hand on the king's hands. Okay, so they're holding the bow together. And he said, "Open the east window." And he opened it. He caused it to be open. Okay, he might have walked over and opened it, but he's holding a bow and string, so probably he got the window open is the point. Okay, then Elisha said, "Shoot," and he shot. And he said, that is, Elisha said, "The arrow of the Lord's deliverance and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For you must strike the Syrians at Aphek till you have destroyed them." So he says, he tells him, here's your battle plan. Then he said, "Take the arrows." So he took them, and he said to the king of Israel, "Strike the ground." So he takes the arrows, and he struck the ground 3 times, whoom, 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 and stopped. And the man of God was angry with him and said, "You should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck Syria till you had destroyed it. But now you will strike Syria only 3 times. So this was prophetic, and it was symbolic. You almost want to give Joash a little bit of an excuse here because he didn't necessarily understand what was going on. But when Elisha told him to strike the ground without saying how many times, it was clear there's something going on here. And it does show Joash's character in the sense that he did strike the ground with the arrows 3 times, but that he only struck the ground 3 times when he was told to strike the ground with the idea of keep striking it. When he only did it 3 times, it shows that maybe there was a lack of zeal in him that should have been there. something was up because Elisha was really displeased with it. And we read the reason. He said, this was basically a prophetic thing you were doing. So now you're only going to smite him 3 times. So that's the last thing we hear from Elisha. Then Elisha died, it says in verse 20, and they buried him. Is that the end of Elisha? Well, sort of, yes, no, kind of, okay, but not. And so, this is interesting. And the raiding bands from Moab is on the other side of the Jordan River, a little bit south from where the Syrians were coming in, raiding bands from Moab invaded the land in the spring of the year. So they went up into Israel. And so it was as they were burying a man. So Elisha's been dead for a while. And as they were burying a man, suddenly they spied a band of raiders. So they see a bunch of Moabites coming. They're like, we need to get out of here. We need to get this done. Somebody had died. And they put the man in the tomb of Elisha. And when the man was let down and touched the bones of Elisha, so that tells us he'd been in the ground or been in the tomb for a long enough time where they could refer to his corpse as bones. When they touched the bones of Elijah, this dead man, he revived and stood on his feet. Okay, this guy came back alive. And this was God's way of letting people know, you know what, Elisha might be gone, but first of all, he's not forgotten, and what he has said is not going to be forgotten either. His ministry goes beyond himself. And so God just did this because they came into contact with Elisha, and even though Elijah physically had died, if you're like Eastern Orthodox, you get into relics and the sacred bones of the saints. That's not what this is teaching. It's just God's confirming the words of Elisha once again by having a miracle be associated with them to the point where a dead guy touches his bones, comes back alive. Now, there could have been a pilgrimage, hundreds of people going there later and said, we need to touch his bones, or we need to bring our dead here. And it was a sign to Israel. All of a sudden, this guy comes back alive. It's like, whoa, the Lord is the God of Elisha. Okay, and Elisha was his true servant. So I imagine the fellow that had died, it says he revived and stood on his feet. I'm sure his family was pretty happy, and the guys who were with him were like, hey. And it does say when the man was let down, so it seems like the tomb was low, like maybe a pit of some sort or something, and when they were lowering him into it, he touches the bones and he comes back alive. So I imagine they hauled him out of there pretty quick. And how they found out he was alive would be interesting if they looked and said, hey, he's moving. Or if they looked down and the guy said, hey, you want to get me out of here? Whatever was going on anyway. So this is kind of how the story of Elisha ends, with him actually helping somebody even after he had died. It's not the first person that the Lord used Elisha to bring back to life. So, we see that. So now we go back, and here we are, verse 22. And Hazael, king of Syria, oppressed Israel all the days of Jehoahaz. So now we've gone all the way back up to Jehoahaz. But the Lord was gracious to them, that is to Israel, had compassion on them, and regarded them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God had made a covenant with their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God keeps covenant. And God would not yet destroy them or cast them from his presence. So God was very gracious. He helped them. If you remember, Jehoahaz at this time had been crying out to the Lord for help, and God remembered his covenant. So he answered Jehoahaz's prayers, and we're told raised up a deliverer. Remember, we were told that earlier, and that was, what was that? That's verse 5. God had raised up a deliverer. And here we get the insight. So we see how the story is kind of like a tapestry in the sense that it's woven, And so, but it does say, and note carefully here, that God would not yet destroy them or cast them from his presence. Eventually, because of Israel's ongoing apostasy, it got to the point where they just would not give up their wickedness. And that's why God allowed the Assyrians to destroy their country, take them captive. And to this day, nobody knows what happened to the 10 tribes. All kinds of speculation. And we do see that there are members of the 10 tribes that filtered down into Judea later. I can remember Anna, the old woman in the temple. She was from the tribe of Asher. And we see some other people in New Testament times. So some of them did come back into the land, okay? But for the most part, the 10 tribes as an entity are gone. Nobody knows where they are. And there's a lot of speculation, like I say. And some of it's pretty weird, too, okay? Like, one view is that, well, the 10 tribes, they went to England, and that's the English people are the true Israel. It's like, thank you, Mr. Englishman, but I don't think that's true, okay? Yeah. And if you go and do some research in history, you'll find it doesn't hold up. But there's actually people who have kind of made their own religion based on that. We are the true people of God. You know, the white people in England are the true Israelites, and it's like, no, okay? And they're usually associated with a whole bunch of other really bad teachings, okay? We don't know what happened to them. But here's the deal. God does. He knows where they are. If he wants to regather. There might be a lot of people running around today that think they're Gentiles that actually are descendants physically of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Lord knows who they are. But we don't know any man after the flesh, Paul said, any longer. That doesn't matter. What matters is if you're born again. So God did not yet destroy them, okay, or cast them from his presence. But he was going to eventually. Now verse 24 says, now Hazael, king of Syria, died. Then Ben-Hadad, his son, reigned in his place. Remember, we covered that earlier, so it's going back again to that. And Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from the land of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, the cities which he had taken out of the hand of Jehoahaz, his father, by war. So note in verse 25, it's Jehoash, and then now it says, 3 times Joash defeated him and recaptured the cities of Israel. So it's pretty clear. Joash is the deliverer that's referred to in verse 5 earlier. He was the son of the king. It's kind of a neat thing. The royal prince went and delivered his people. So it's pretty cool. So Joash defeated him and recaptured the cities 3 times. Anybody know why it was only 3 times? Thank you, yeah, because he only struck the ground 3 times when he went and visited Elisha. Had he struck it more than that, the Syrian problem would have been gone. But he did deliver them 3 times, and he's to be commended for that as a deliverer of God's people. And that was in answer to prayer, because if you remember, it says Jehoahaz had prayed. He prayed to the Lord, prayed to Yahweh, the true God of Israel, and the Lord heard him and he had compassion and regarded them. And it's plural when it describes that, when it says that when he had done that, the Lord listened to him. He pleaded with the Lord listened to him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, because the king of Israel had oppressed them. But earlier when we read that God had compassion on them, but the Lord was gracious to them, had compassion on them, and regarded them. That means he paid attention to them. That means Jehoahaz wasn't the only one praying, pretty clearly. Because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's verse 23. So here we see this 3 times Joash defeated him and recaptured the cities of Israel. So he was able to push the Syrians out again, and the people had peace for a period of time. So now next week we're going to shift to Amaziah, who reigns in Judah. If you remember, his dad was the Jehoash, or Joash in Judah, who was good while he was being raised by the high priest. Once the high priest died, he ends up murdering the high priest's son Zechariah because he prophesied against him and he didn't like it, and he introduced idolatry. So his own servants conspired against him and killed him. And then we read that Amaziah came to the throne, and he's going to reign almost 30 years, 29 years. So next week we'll be in chapter 14, Lord willing. If you want to read it ahead of time, I encourage you to do so, and then we'll come in. I'll share with you what I'm able to find out. And anybody have any questions? I'm going to say take the study guide home and fill it out. See how much you can remember. And if you can't, get the Bible open and look through it and see what you can learn.
Quick question: do you know why when they record it, they do it in the order that they do? Because
when they do what now?
When they were writing this down, they do it out of order in terms of.
Well, they're trying to tell a story, and each thing is related to the other. And so they're not just trying to do a chronological, like a book of days, like they have. The Chronicles, like they have the Chronicles of the Anglo-Saxon kings. They actually have written books from, about 1,000 years ago, well, a little more than that. But and it gives it basically a daily, weekly, monthly report of what was going on in the kingdom. We actually have those. If you ever want to study English history, that's like a fantastic tool. Find out what was going on here, what was going on. It's amazing what they talk about. Sometimes it's amazing what they don't talk about, because we learn from other sources. There's like a major war going on. The guy doesn't even mention it, Other things, though, it's like some little trivial thing that happened. It's like they'll spend like a lot of paragraphs on it. So they kept chronicles. They had official guys that kept that. This is put together for a reason. This is not just a chronicle in that sense. This is giving us an inspired record, and for God's purposes, first of all, he expects you to know his word well enough where you get this stuff straightened out. It's like when you read the synoptic gospels. If you read the temptation narrative in Matthew, and then you read it in Luke, the last two temptations are switched around in those two narratives. So what was the last one? Throw yourself off the pinnacle of the temple? Or was it bow down and worship me? First one, it's all agreed, it was turn these stones into bread if you can, if you're the Son of God. So which is the chronological order? How come not both? Is that a mistake in the Bible? No, not at all. Okay, it's both telling you what happened. There's a reason. Can you figure out from studying it what is the actual probable chronological order of the temptation? I think you can. Okay, I'm pretty sure the last one was the one that's on the temple, at the pinnacle of the temple. And there's exegetical reasons for that. But God didn't put his word together the way we might like it to be put together. And remember when Jesus spoke in parables so that some aren't going to be able to get it. He said, having eyes they don't see, having ears they don't hear. And God's purpose is getting worked out. So sometimes things are in his word. It's like when you walk in a forest. We say it's organic. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, it grew up according to God's providential plan, but you don't find every tree exactly 3 feet away from the other one. For 1,000 miles. Well, so there's a tree exactly 3 feet. Now, if you get a microscope, you do find the molecular world put together pretty much like that, where it's exact. But generally, you see, it's almost like an artist would do or something. It's not uniform the way we might like it. Sometimes when you look over off on the horizon, you're looking at a mountain peak, and what you don't realize is there's 3 valleys between you and there. Somebody else is in a different perspective. They're looking at it, they see 3 valleys. You just look and you see some mountains. But which one's true? They're both true, just two different perspectives, okay? And if you do some research and study God's word, these things can get worked out. And it is interesting. Part of it, I think, is because of God's love to us. He does give us his word in such a way that will engage our intellect. The problem is that with few exceptions, most of us are too lazy to, I'm not talking about you when I say that, okay? I'm talking about myself more than others. Often we're too lazy to actually do the work to find out, okay, why is this set up this way? If you get some good commentaries and some good, theological, you'll find out at least a couple hundred years ago, somebody already worked through this and has the answer. That's why I love the commentary of Matthew Poole. He wrote a commentary in English, also wrote a commentary in Latin. And it's funny because when you read modern commentaries, and they're so condescending to the Puritans and the early church writers primarily, but particularly the Reformers, well, in their day, they didn't understand the Bible the way we do now that we've got all this scientific blah, blah, blah. And they're going on and on. So you go back and read Matthew Poole, who wrote in the 1600s, and he goes, yeah, some people believe this, this, and this, and it's exactly what the modern guys are saying nobody knew until they came along. And he says, but here's why this isn't true, and then he refutes it. And he says, see, we can actually take the Bible at face value because it's accurate and it's true. And he just totally takes their theories that they thought nobody figured out until they came along and blows them out of one. Time and again, I've read in his commentary where he does that. And it's like, you just have to go back and do some studying. Those guys, they were in the Word. So it's a good lesson for us. It's not totally confusing. It's just difficult.
Yeah.
It makes you go slow. And sometimes if you have to, it's kind of like God saying, slow down a little bit and look at this. There's some things happening here. One thing, you're seeing Judah preserved, and slowly, sadly, but surely, you're seeing Israel, the northern kingdom, destroy itself. And eventually it's going to be gone. And yet Judah is preserved in spite of the fact they had some flaky kings. There's something going on in Judah that will be God's covenant promises to the house of David and the promise of the Messiah. It's all about Jesus. But the northern tribes, because they broke with that, eventually they don't amount to anything. And once again, it shows that if you're not right with God through his Son, and not looking for the Messiah and walking with him, well, things are not going to go well, ultimately. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned. That's way overkill on a very good question that you asked. I apologize. Okay? Yes, Steve?
Are Matthew Poole's commentaries available online free somewhere?
It's hard to find online. It might be, you can find it. probably online, because most everything's been digitalized by now. I just, like I say, I use these books. So I know Matthew Henry is, you know, he's online. He, you know, I have like the Blue Letter Bible, and Matthew Henry's commentary is available there. But Matthew Poole, P-O-O-L-E, he's really good. And he wrote, him and Matthew Henry, I'm not sure who wrote second, but one of them wrote to supplement what the other one had written. I think Poole wrote first, and Henry wrote to supplement what Poole said. So the two commentaries taken together are pretty complete. Spurgeon went so far as, because Spurgeon was a very great preacher, and his opinions carry quite a bit of weight, I think. Spurgeon said, the country preacher who has Matthew Poole and Matthew Henry as his only commentaries pretty much has all he needs, other than the scriptures themselves. So that's how highly Spurgeon praised those two works together. So, do you have Matthew Henry?
Yes.
Okay, if you, yeah, Poole's available, but it went out of print a few years ago. They're selling the 3 volumes for like $35 a few years ago, but those days are gone until somebody else starts printing them up. Banner of Truth has it, but they're pretty expensive. See, why don't you close this in prayer? Okay?
Lord God, thank you for your word, and I pray you would help us to heed it and obey you, and I pray you keep us safe as we travel home, including Sarah, thank you that she's coming back today, and just pray you would watch over us, protect us, and bless us, and help us to honor you in everything.
Amen. Thank you. And there's a memory verse on here, guys. If anybody comes up to me Sunday and actually says the memory verse, I'll owe you $1.
I'm a